Paul, how you doing today? Thanks for joining.
I'm doing great. And yourself, Kirk?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. It's a busy world. Budget periods seem to be expanding across the whole year now. They're not siphoned only to the last 3 months of the year these days. So there's always a budget to be done, always a forecast to be made. Do you find the same thing is true for you?
I definitely think it's true in FP&A. It's even if you're not doing a budget, there's a rolling forecast. There's almost always something going on, right? It just seems to keep getting busier and busier.
That's 100% true. Yeah, there's definitely not less work to be done as time goes by. It seems that with the upgraded software that's consistently added to the world, we always find more ways to add new work, not necessarily relinquish it, which is a good thing from an analysis perspective. From a burnout perspective, well, that's a different story.
As long as it's productive work and you're not doing a ton of manual work, it's good. But you do have to definitely balance how much can somebody work.
Sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. So I can see people joining here. This is really nice. Welcome everybody who's jumping on here. We're going to get started in a couple of seconds. One thing to call out here, you might see a poll on your screen. This will remain here throughout the webinar itself. Feel free to answer these questions. If you need to change your answers before submission, you can feel free to submit those. You also see a third question there. That's regarding Drivetrain in particular. You can leave that anytime towards the end or right now. The first two, though, you might be able to answer already. Those are, what are your top challenges in FP&A today? Got a couple items listed for you. Maybe it's others. Feel free to list that as well. And then, do you plan to upgrade in FP&A software at all? We're going to talk a little bit about the timing, about upgrading software. How do you evaluate a software? We'll get into all those details, but feel free to jump on those questions in particular. Welcome everybody else. I can see a fair few joining. This is great. I'm Kirk Kappelhoff. I'm the Director of Strategic Finance here at Drivetrain. I'll be hosting our lucky guest Paul today for the official FP&A guy. He is an expert modeler and an expert FP&A guru. And so, Paul, I would love if you could give us a little bit of background on where you got started. How did you become the FP&A guy to begin with?
Yeah, so I got started in FP&A, frankly, after grad school. I worked in contracts, went to grad school, title was finance analyst, but it was really a business analyst, was doing a lot of report writing, SQL. Opportunity came for a promotion. It was FP&A, and I said, you're going to pay me more? Okay, I'll take that job. Little did I know I'd spend the rest of my career basically in FP&A at the time. It was really just a way to get promoted, so to speak. And so I started my journey into FP&A. And then really my journey into the FP&A guy started probably about 8 years ago now. I reached out to a guy by the name of Ken Fick. And I said, hey, can I give you a Starbucks gift card for 30 minutes of your time? I was looking for a job. He goes, I don't want your gift card. I want you to write an article for my website. Suck at writing, but all right, I'll give it a try. And surprisingly enough, he liked the article and asked me to write a few more, offered me something for him, and I did it and started sharing them on LinkedIn. And that started the journey for growing a following on LinkedIn and eventually led to where I'm at today. As far as the nickname, the FP&A guy, that was a hashtag I used at one time on LinkedIn. And kind of funny story about that is decided I was going to stop using it. Someone complained about it, saying I shouldn't refer to myself as a guy. And I'm like, it's like, because there's a woman in FP&A. I'm like, but I'm talking about me, not the profession. And then, so I was going to switch it, just like, fine, I don't want to deal with the controversy. And then someone used it again, and everybody started following me because of it. And I just stuck with it and said, I'm just going to embrace it. I don't care if there's one person that has a problem with it.
So,
and there you go.
The story of the FP&A guy. There's
one of the better decisions I made was to stick with that brand.
I love it. Well, no, thank you so much for that background. I can already see a couple of questions coming in here. I can feel free to continually add them in if you're in the chat here. One of the ones that we've gotten started with is, what's the difference between a BI tool and an FP&A tool? Also, is FP&A and strategic finance platform the same thing? This is a good question. So there's a couple ways. I'll answer it from my perspective, Paul, and I'd be really interested in what you have to say about this. So high level business intelligence tools are one category. FP&A tools or strategic finance tools are a whole other category. The way I like to think about it is where BI tools kind of stop, FP&A picks up. BI is more descriptive and diagnostic, what happened, why it happened, dealing with actual data, whereas FP&A tools are typically predictive and prescriptive. That is what will happen and what action will we take, right? And kind of in terms of trying to figure out what exactly strategic finance is, if you were asking the questions, what's the best path to achieve your targets? Are you on track to meet your targets? And how can you sort of course correct to grow even faster or rejoin the path that you want it to be on? That's what I think of as sort of a strategic finance tool. It's a new breed of tool relative to the accounting and finance space. But those three questions, if those are on your mind continuously, it's probably about time to think about a strategic finance software in general. So again, BI tools, typically historical, FP&A or strategic finance tools, a little bit more future-based and forecast-based. And specifically on that strategic finance piece, it's not just guessing your future numbers. It's more strategically thinking about the best path to achieve your target metrics for your industry. So, Paul, that'd be my high-level view. I'd be really interested with your wealth of experience. Would you say anything that I say differs there or anything else that you've seen that you want to add on?
No, I mean, I think that's a pretty good summary. Just a couple things I would say is we're seeing a little bit of a convergence, right? FP&A is planning and analysis. BI tools are also used for analysis. You have some FP&A tools that very much focus on BI, some that say, hey, we're going to try to push everything we can to another BI tool. And there's a different purpose for the FP&A tool, like you said, but I do think there's a little bit of that merging. And I think there's a really good point about their forward looking for the most part, where in general, your BI tool is historic. It's looking at actuals. It's really about what happened. With your FP&A tool, there's a lot more of those algorithms and really thinking about prediction. And then when I think of strategic finance, I think of, an FP&A tool that may or may not be a strategic finance. Some of them may just have basic planning capabilities. When you get into strategic finance, that tool is really focused on the operational and helping the whole organization and going beyond just that planning with metrics and the way it thinks about things. So I think you can have an FP&A tool that's not necessarily a strategic finance tool. You can have, I don't think you can have a strategic finance tool without the FP&A component, but I think you can have the other way around.
Okay, so strategic finance, in your view, would be sort of a subset of the FP&A piece.
I think so. I think you have to have the planning piece in your strategic finance tool as a general rule, especially if it's going to support an FP&A department, because people are going to have two different tools. You don't have an FP&A tool and a strategic finance. So I kind of think of it as almost a subcategory.
Got it.
Well, you often do have a BI tool and an FP&A tool, right? You can have separate, but I don't know of anyone that really has two FP&A, an FP&A tool and a strategic finance.
Right. Okay. Got you. That makes a lot of sense. So your answer is quite apt for some of the poll responses I'm seeing here. Most people are citing data gathering and custom report as their top challenges in FP&A, obviously tied in with the BI piece right there. Any thoughts on that? Is this what you've typically seen? Is this an issue that's kind of risen with the growth of FP&A and strategic finance tools? Or has this kind of always been the challenge?
I think data gathering has always been the biggest challenge. I've seen studies that say, anywhere from 30 to 60% of an FP&A person, sometimes even more, is spent on non-value add activities, with the biggest piece of that being data cleansing, data gathering. It's a real challenge. Data is exploding, right? The proliferation of data continues to make it more and more difficult to manage it all. And so that doesn't surprise me. That's what I hear from people. That's definitely what I would have expected as the top answer.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can also see here that it looks like 46% of the people on today's call have mentioned that they plan to upgrade an FP&A software in the next 6 months, right? Almost half the people. Are you seeing, typically in your world, with all the polls that you do and the calls that you're conducting, a greater appetite for FP&A tools? Or are you seeing people sort of drive more towards Excel?
You're definitely seeing more of a need to manage the business, the collaboration, the data gathering. I don't think it's an either or between Excel and FP&A. If you have a really technical department, let's be honest, you can, with the Microsoft tech stack, with BI, with Excel, Power Platform, if you want, you can build your own tool. But you better make sure you always have those experts to maintain it, right? It's doable. You could stay on Excel and build something yourself, or you can get a tool, but you're definitely seeing more of a need to do something beyond Excel. And I think a good example, anyone who follows Ben Murray and the SaaS CFO, he does an annual tech stack survey. Look at the last several years, and it continues to creep up on how many people are using an FP&A tool. They're becoming more effective, more efficient, the cost has come down with how much competition's out there. More and more people are realizing it. And just, the benefits, particularly, like I said, collaboration, data, security, those things that are difficult to get with just Excel because it's not an enterprise tool at the end of the day.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. Yes. Yeah, I'm quite excited to meet him. I'm in Denver tonight, and he'll be throwing a little bit of a dinner. And so I'm yet to meet him. He is a partner of Drivetrain, and anybody that doesn't know him should definitely go out and take a look at his stuff. It's very interesting.
Okay, yeah, it's the fast CFO, in case anyone's wondering. Check out the website, Ben Murray. It's great stuff.
Yeah, really good stuff. So let's dive into a little bit about what FP&A software use cases really are, and then when you're ready for one, right? When you're ready to buy a true FP&A software.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general rule, there are a couple signs that you need one, and then use cases. So I'd say there's 2 or 3 areas that you see people using it. Sometimes people will put in an FP&A tool really for the reporting and helping with close. I've seen some just use the tool around consolidation and reporting. And many may start there and then they add planning later. But I think your 2 main use cases are the reporting side, the planning, and then there are tools, Drivetrain among others, that really allows you to dig into your data, right? To drill down and see the analysis. So I think those are the general use cases. Beyond that, the tools are getting better and better at the collaborative portion, which isn't so much a use case, but is important to be thinking about is you want a tool that your business is willing to use. Historically, the business is like, I don't want to enter anything in that tool. They send it all to you and you enter it. We're starting to see that change a little bit, where more and more employees are actually using the tool. So I think that's the use case. As far as signs that it's time, I think there's a few things. I mean, everybody's familiar with the term Excel. If you worked in FP&A, you've been there. And Excel is a fabulous tool, and I wouldn't tell anyone to get rid of the spreadsheet. There's always a place for it, even if you have a purpose-built tool. But there comes that point where you're linking to other files, numbers are wrong, you can't pull in all the data, you got 4 or 5 sources, and it's taking a long time. Yes, you can do a lot with Power Query, but it just becomes difficult. You don't have the version control and the change control you get with a purpose-built tool that has a database on the back end. There's just benefits you're not going to get with Excel. At the same time, and I think everybody wonders, but isn't Excel more flexible? Yes. The reality is unstructured system, unstructured data is going to be more flexible than something that's structured, no matter what the tool is. Doesn't say the tool isn't great, not to mean you don't get a lot of benefits. But the reality is, if flexibility is your number one thing and you can deal with all the other headaches, you're probably not ready for a tool. If you can't deal with the other headaches, you're going to need to make that trade-off because the benefit becomes worth it because the headaches, as you become more and more complex, only grow.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've just seen this question come in here, which ties almost exactly into what you're saying. I've got one. It says, is anything really more functional than Excel? And this is a double-sided sword. My thoughts on this are you kind of got the spectrum, right? Flexibility on the one end, which is what you were talking about, which Excel exceeds at, but then standardization on the other end, which Excel really struggles to sort of maintain when it comes to standardization. You mentioned before a lot of the non-value add tasks. I'm imagining downloading, Excel data from like NetSuite or your ERP and trying to put it into your Excel model. Those non-value add tasks that, teenagers could do if they were trained right, not FP&A analysts. That's what you're trying to eliminate when you're moving to a tool. But that flexibility, it's sometimes what I would say worth the sacrifice in order to jump to a tool where you get a little bit of the automation and a little bit of the chill down. So interested, what are your thoughts on that? Is anything more functional than Excel?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, the reality is no. I don't think Excel can do anything. I don't know how many have seen this. I mean, there's an artist in Japan that does his artwork in Excel. He made a living off. I mean, you could do just about anything you want, way beyond finance. I still remember when one of the sales reps for one of the tools tried to convince me that his tool could do anything Excel could do, including the artwork. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to call BS on that. There's no way. You may have a great tool, but you're not doing that. And, even beyond that, there are a lot of other situations. So I said, if if wanting just the flexibility, that functionality, Excel is hard to beat. But as I mentioned before, it's about trade-offs. It's not going to handle some of those automated tasks well. It's not going to handle combining your data, multi-dimensionality. Excel doesn't handle multiple dimensions well, right? If you need to look at customer and entity and currency and account, and you get 5 or 6 different entities, or not entities, but dimensions, that's really, really hard to do in Excel. So there comes that point where the benefits of the tool, even though you give up some flexibility, outweigh the flexibility.
Okay. Well, this leads quite nicely into my next question, which is, how do you evaluate a tool, right? You mentioned 5 or 6 dimensions there. When do you know, okay, this is the time to sort of make the switch? And what should I be looking for from an evaluation perspective when I'm choosing a tool itself?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. First, as far as knowing when that switch is, it really comes down to when you're having difficulty collaborate, managing the numbers, and the process is just constantly in a state of stress, flux, chaos. And anyone who's done a large company on Excel knows what I'm talking. I know more than one FP&A person that's left a job because they were tired of dealing with trying to roll up $1 billion company in Excel. And so I think that's the first thing. The second, as far as going through the process, the most important thing is to know what you need, right? Because every tool is going to tell you they can meet your needs. The salespeople are going to tell you what you want to hear within reason. And so if you do not know what you really want, it's easy to get caught up in the bells and whistles that you may never use. So know your use cases. Know, hey, what's my ERP? What tools work well with that ERP? There may be limitations. What are the other data I need to bring in? And start small with those details, known of what you want, and then also have an idea of what type of tool. Hey, does it need to manage consolidation? Does it need to have multi-currency? Do I want it to be a tool that basically allows me to stay in Excel? Do I want it to be a replacement? And so knowing what the kind of different types are out there and knowing what works for your department, right? Because if somebody wants, basically, I want to stay in Excel and I just want a database, they're going to select a different tool than somebody who wants to replace Excel and use it as little as possible in the planning process. Yeah, those are going to be different data sets. Different tool sets you're looking at.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, does team size play into, as a factor when deciding your tool, right? If you're a team of 1, right, sometimes you're a fractional CFO and you need to just help, this particular finance org stand up a model versus a team of, let's just say, 6 or 7 FP&A reps for $1 billion company. How does that differ based off of your tool evaluator?
Yeah, for sure. There's kind of 3 groupings, I think, of the market, and there's subsets with each of those. You have tools designed for small market, and within that, you have some that are really decided for owners or founders or those with no FP&A team or maybe 1. Then you have kind of the small market designed for those that have an FP&A team, but usually a couple people. You get into mid-market tools, and how you define that is going to vary a lot. But I would say, probably usually you're looking definitely more than 5 million, 10 million, some say 50. You start to get a few FP&A people, you have some scale. You have the mid-market, and then you have enterprise. And I'll give an example of where it could be very different. I was at a conference, and I was talking to one of the big, huge enterprise tools. And their biggest customer, because of the way their processes are written, uses 6 terabytes of data in memory.
Incredible.
Now, I'm like, you're not going to select anything in the small and medium space. Only a large enterprise tool that has some very strong computational power is going to work for you. Whereas if I have 1 person, there's no reason I need a tool that can manage that type of power, and I'm going to way overpay for it.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm interested then, when we're talking about size-specific tools, are there also industry-specific tools? I see one question here from Catherine Lorenzo. Is there an FP&A tool that could be customized for the SaaS industry?
Yeah, so a great place to look. Again, I'm going to reference Ben Murray, the SaaS CFO. He lists the top FP&A tools that SaaS companies are using. Last year, Drivetrain was the number 1 listed tool. There were others that made that list. Mosaic is a purpose-built. And then there are many tools that may not be have a, say, hey, our number one industry is SaaS, but they can support SaaS. There are a number of other tools I could mention, but I think that's a good resource to look at the Ben Murray SaaS CFO. You can also look at the third gen guide I did. Many tools, I'd say most tools try to be industry agnostic.
Okay. Because they want to reach a broader market sort of thing rather than niche themselves?
Correct, yeah. Because sometimes it can be difficult to reach the scale that they want with niche. And two, the foundation of planning is very similar across companies, right? You're taking historical actuals, you're taking some kind of metrics, some drivers and assumptions, and forecasting the future.
Got it.
It's not like planning is completely different because I'm in this industry versus that industry. At its core, inputs, outputs, all that is very similar.
I see. I've also got one here from Victor Chen. It says, apart from product features, what else should we look at when evaluating a tool? Outside of the product itself.
I think it's a great question. Outside of the product, there's a few things you should keep in mind. One, how's the training for the company you're selecting? Do you feel that they're stable? Right? I mean, this is a huge market. There's 160 tools in the market. And the reality is in 2 years, I will be shocked if the number is 165. I would expect
Do you think it's going to half or do you think it's going to double?
I don't think it's going to double. I think it will decrease a little bit. I've been saying that for a while, so I've been surprised so far because it seems to just keep, yes, some tools have been lost. So I think you need to also look at, do they have some solid customers? Do I feel comfortable with the leadership team? Do they seem stable? I think those are good things to ask. And then as far as the product, I think beyond what I mentioned, I like to break it down into kind of 4 key areas that you should think about. There's the model. How do they handle my data? Which gets beyond just the product, but can they bring in the data I want? Can they manage the dimensions I need? The metrics. And so there's that core model that they build. How long is that going to take? How do they think about that? From there, you have what's called the planning layer, which is, do they use Excel syntax? Do they use their own syntax? Is it natural language? How easy is it to learn? Do I need a coder to be able to write a basic formula? Right? There are some tools where that's almost the case. And then from there, it's how do they handle reporting? Can they manage custom reporting? Can I build my own metrics? Do they have the different type of charts that I need? Do they have a water flow or a bar or a column? What's their level of managing reporting? Can I integrate it with my tools for presentation? Whether that be PowerPoint, Google, whatever it might be. How easy is that? And then the last layer I really think of is workflow and collaboration. Does it integrate with Teams or Slack or my email? Can I sign different approvals? How can I manage the workflow piece? So that's kind of how the layers I think about. And incorporated in all that is how do they think about AI? Like I've had some great conversations with the co-founder for you guys for Drivetrain, and I know he thinks about it as something that should be infused throughout the product. It's not, hey, here's this standalone AI thing, but how do I incorporate AI to make the life of the end user easier? And I think those are things that you should ask. What's that roadmap look like? What are they doing to really take advantage of this explosion in technology?
Sure. Yeah, very interesting. So it sounds like AI should be almost infused within the DNA of the tool rather than sort of being an add-on feature for it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, that was a Loke's view, and I think there's something to be said for that. I think there's cases where we'll have some standalone, and there can be. But I think over the long run, in my view, the best use case is those who really infuse it. And don't think of it as a standalone thing, but just think of it as part of the software process. And how do we bring that in? Just like you think about the user interface and everything else as part of the holistic process, that's where we're heading with AI.
Got it. So AI is a very exciting topic. Let's talk about something that's not that exciting, maybe a little bit scary, implementation. So, I mean, there's a million different ways we can cut this. People have historically, some great time implementing. Majority of the time, though, I'd say 80-20 split. It can be a bit of a headache. The big question I have for you is, what do you feel about in-house implementation versus sort of external implementation? For the audience, what that typically means is if you're implementing a tool, should the company that owns the tool implement it themselves, or is having a third-party provider a good idea to implement that tool to kind of separate it, right? The work from implementing from the tool itself. What are your thoughts on that one, Paul?
I don't I don't have a strong opinion that says you should do one or the other. I think you just need to be aware that there's pros and cons either way. If it's in-house, you get the benefit that they're generally going to know the tool the best. They also have, I would say, more of an incentive to implement well because they're receiving the long-term revenue, whereas you go to someone who's just implementing it, right? They're not getting the subscription revenue after. Yeah, they might have a little residual with the company, but not the same. And so I think those are some things that are benefits toward an in-house. They generally will know the tool better. They have that incentive. On the flip side, if you go out to a third party, one, they're not employees of that company. So they don't have that company line per se. You may get a less filtered view of things. Two, you're generally specialists in implementation and they've seen many different tools, which can be some benefit, where sometimes the people that are implementing for one company may have only seen that company and may not have as broad an experience. So I think sometimes that can be the benefit there. But I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think the key thing is making sure whoever's doing the implementation, that you have clear outline of what your requirements are, that you have a good relationship with them where you can be open and honest in the process.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Do you think that either external or internal has a longer versus a shorter timeline for implementation generally, or does it really just depend on the customer?
I think some of it depends on the tool too, because if you look, most tools that go external tend to be upper mid-market to enterprise, which by nature is more complex and is going to have a longer implementation time.
Okay.
You don't see big, huge tools that have been in the market for a long time. Rarely do they do the implementation themselves. They almost all use third party. So I don't think you can really say one's necessarily faster, because generally, I would say most of those that have outsourced have more complex use cases. And that's often why they outsource, is let someone else manage that, because it's so different than selling the software and managing the SaaS piece of it, where you have a smaller customer base, less complex customers. It's easier to keep it in-house. So I don't know that one's longer or the other. What's your take? What's your experience on that, Kirk?
Well, I mean, it can vary drastically. I think one thing that we're touching on as well when it comes to the implementation piece is, right, like you mentioned training. Training, I think, at the end of the day, after implementation, I want to know that I can use the tool properly. And so I think, like you mentioned, in-house is a bit more incentive to keep that long relationship, because they are the ones, doing the implementation. The other thing that I've kind of seen is sometimes you get into a dangerous triangle where if something's going wrong, whose fault is it? Is it the customer who's buying the tool? Is it the person implementing it? Or is it the tool itself? It's very hard to pinpoint that, where normally if you're implementing your own tool, for the most part, you're just going to take it because that's sort of the customer's always right mentality, and you want them to have the best experience on it. For example, with Drivetrain itself, most of the time, our product features are driven by what our customers are asking for. I don't know if we'd be able to be as close to our customers in that way if someone else was implementing our tool for us. So that'd be one thing that I would touch on. One thing that you're kind of referencing slightly is this difference between first, second, and third gen tools. First gen would be those bigger ones that might take longer implementation. Could you just educate us on the lay of the land of what these tools are in terms of like first, second, third gen, how we think about them? And then is third gen heading in the right direction? Is it the future, or is there still a space for first and second gen, maybe like, let's say 10 years down the line?
Yeah, so first I will say, I think there's definitely a space for first and second, in that I don't think of the generations in the way of like a phone, right? Okay. How many of us have a first generation iPhone or Android? If you do, upgrade is all I'm going to say. Right? And wow, you kept a phone that long. So I think of it different. And, when I think of first gen, a lot of your big tools, your Oracle, your SAP, your IBM, I don't see those companies going anywhere. When I say first gen, it doesn't mean their technology is inferior. But what it does mean when I typically think of the generations, it's a way to segment the market, think how long they've been out there, and also think about how they think about things. First gen was very much finance focused. Often you had a code. On-prem is where they started. Multi-million-dollar implementation, very expensive tools that scaled to the biggest out there. That that's most your first gen. Your second gen tended to be very much mid-market. They became cloud. They focused a little bit more on the user use case, became much more cost-friendly, a little quicker to implement. And then what you're really seeing with third gen is the explosion of low code, no code, that collaborative mentality, that strategic finance mentality, and being able to support the smallest of tools. You have some designed for just founders. And so I think more than, hey, these other ones are going to go away, because many of those tools have re-architected, right? You could re-architect a tool and address the technological. I think what we're going to continue to see is more growth in the third gen, and then some of them continue to move more up market because it takes time, right? Most third gen tools have started in the smaller mid-market. It's really hard in any industry, but especially FP&A and finance with public companies, from day one to go out to American Express or Amazon and be like, hey, we just started. Trust us to manage all your public finances, your 10Q and everything. I'm going to go with this other company because I know I won't get fired if something goes wrong.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So on that specifically then, what would you say? It's like a hypothetical use case. Someone's using one of those first gen, let's say like an Anaplan, a big player, and then they were to move to something like Drivetrain. What would be some of the positives and the negatives that they'd experience in a transition like that from a first gen tool to a third gen tool, one that's scaling, right? But not quite like the Anaplan level size, right?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is they tend to be easier to understand, easier to manage. Anaplan, one of the biggest complaints, and I'll use them just because you mentioned them, is, right, you almost have to have a model builder. The coding is not easy. It takes a while to learn. It's powerful, but there's a strong learning curve. And so as general rule with Drivetrain or any third gen tool, you should expect a shorter learning curve. They should be a higher low code and no code. I think that's one benefit you're going to get. You're often going to have a more updated user interface. They're usually going to have some new bells and whistles, a real focus on collaboration that you may not see. At the same time, they're not going to have all the functionality of those second-gen tools because they haven't been around long enough. The tool that's been around 15 years is going to have more functionality than a tool that's been around 9 out of 10 times. I'd say 99 out of 100. There's occasional, and the new tool is going to have some things, but you're going to sometimes need to be just a little bit patient. Doesn't mean you're not getting a better experience. They just may not have everything you get with that big tool. At the same time, you're going to get some trade-offs. It's going to be probably a little harder to learn, harder to manage, may not have some of the new cool things that you want. And so you have to weigh those and decide what makes sense for you.
Got it. I see what you're saying. So more to that trade-off discussion before, where if you want one of these bigger tools, you may have to hire an analyst just to run the tool itself, just because it's so complex, and they'll need to be a high coder person. But they can deal with the big data piece quite well. Whereas these smaller tools, while they're up and coming, right, simpler to use, but the big piece is the scale, right? How can they scale relative to my business, sort of thing? Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a scalability component, and then there's usually just a number of features. They often don't quite have as many. I think those are the two things. Like when I worked for a big company, one of the companies I worked for is American Express, and we had to have a whole team that managed. We had IBM planning and analytics, and we had an entire team of people dedicated to just supporting the tool. I can remember many conversations with developers, and that can be a challenging thing to try to manage a tool that way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, moving away from sort of the finance piece of FP&A tools, I see a question here about what are the non-finance use cases of FP&A tools themselves. Specifically, maybe there's some things around headcount. This is one thing that we've been focusing a lot on, is simplifying sort of the HRIS experience, where you've got not only your actual headcount, but then you need to manage your to-be hireds and then matching those when they actually do get hired. Your to-be hired sales manager, actually you find somebody, you need to replace that person, simplifying that process. Are there other things that FP&A tools can focus on that aren't necessarily finance related?
I think so, for sure. I mean, I'm guessing most people have heard of the term XP&A or connected or continuous planning or whatever you want to call it, integrated planning. Many FP&A tools can go beyond just that finance use case. Yes, helping with headcount. Other good areas is sales planning, whether, sales operations, rev ops, supply chain planning. many tools that are designed for planning, especially if they're bringing in different data. Your typical planning tool will bring in your CRM data, your headcount data, your ERP data.
Okay.
Those are the three I kind of look at for a minimum. Then some will also, and I believe Drivetrain is one of these, there's a number that will bring in some of your BI data, whether it be Snowflake or your database data, your data warehouse, your data mart, whatever that may be.
Yep.
And so with that type of data, yes, you can go beyond just your financial planning. And many of the tools are focused on allowing you to do that. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kirk, but you have a number of users that are using you guys for like sales planning, right? Not just financial.
Yeah, totally. I think probably our biggest user base would obviously be the FP&A world, but then our second user base would be RevOps, right? Integrated with Salesforce, HubSpot, those sorts of things, and just ensuring that you have a pipeline from like the top end down to all the way to your essentially your new ARR essentially. And then the next piece would probably be the HR teams, which increasingly our headcount module has gained a lot of traction. One, because we want to be able to break out each expense item at the employee level. Not only the taxes and pieces, but the benefits, the 401k items. So not only I can see this at a department view, but I can then see it at an individual view. Think about budgeting, that sort of experience, right? When you're budgeting, you want people to be able to go in, quickly add who they want to hire as sort of an ideal role, and then you want the system to just do its thing. That's the goal of where we want to get. In something like Drivetrain, we're hoping to simplify that process so they don't need to think anything other than input a line item, right? Move on. When the person gets hired, replace that to be hired role with who they actually are, right? That's kind of the simplicity that we're going for. Is that what you were touching on?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep. Beautiful.
Covered it.
So I got another question here. When evaluating a third-gen tool for your increasingly complex business, what are the top 3 checklist items to make sure the tool can handle your business complexity? Sort of, I'm sure this changes by industry and by business size, but is there sort of like a top 3 item list where you would say, check if it has this. If it can do this, then you're more than likely going to be in the right ballpark.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd look for. First, how many dimensions can it handle? How is it able to handle multiple dimensions to plan? Because many tools that are really focused on the small market struggle to scale with dimensions. Because keep in mind, every time you add a new dimension, you exponentially grow the number of calculations that have to happen, right? If I go from just product and I have 10 products, but then I add product and country to it, and you have 50 countries in the world, you just exploded the amount of calculations that have to happen. So really, how well can it handle dimensions? I think the second thing I look for if you're a complex business is, can it really bring in all your data and manage it? At what level? Can I see the lowest? Can I drill down? Can I get into it? And then the third thing I would look at, if I had to pick just 3, and I'm going to go 4, actually here. The third one is,
we'll take it.
Look at its modeling language and see how well it can really handle being able to write those formulas you need. Because the more complex your business comes, often the more complex the formula you're going to get. So make sure it has a robust formula language. And then that fourth thing is ask it about scale. Like how many users use its tool at a time? Try to do some research with customers. Because many tools will start to bog down at a certain point. The calculations, like I said, it exponentially grows. And if they're handling a lot of dimensions, at some point, most tools are going to struggle. It's just a question of where.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've got this other question here. It's more of a comment, but I'd be interested in your thoughts around this comment. It says, what stops me from thinking about buying a tool is the level of customization it needs. For instance, management would require one kind of data. It could be completely unrelated and different to how I've configured it. I find it difficult when it comes to this kind of customization. And for the customization, I might have to change my data ERP accordingly. So I guess I understand this. I see this a lot when it comes to people wanting to buy a tool, right? It's the flexibility of Excel again, but it's also this various different cuts. There's a management P&L, there's an investor P&L, there's an internal P&L, and that's just the P&L before you've got all the other different cuts of data that you want. Then, like you said, if a region gets added, I think you just mentioned there that the dimensionality piece is something that you should check for, right? Any other additional thoughts on that in terms of handling the views and sort of building it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think what he mentioned is when you configure it, the reality is you're never going to be able to configure the tool for every use case. And there probably are going to be situations where you're going to go back to Excel. You need to think about, am I a stable enough business that I can configure it for the majority of my use cases and make changes on the fly if you're one that's going through a lot of growth pains? And there are definitely tools. Some tools are better than others at handling that reconfiguring and making changes and allowing you to manage it. But almost always, you're still going to have edge cases where you're going to have to do it in Excel. So you need to think about, what are the areas where it really can save me time? Okay, if I can get my budget, my headcount done and really simple, I can get my variance commentary taken care of. Because the reality is most people, even with the tool, are still using a spreadsheet for some level of work. Some companies have figured 100%, but that's often the case. And I think what you need to think about is not so much, I'd look at it a little different, not letting the level of customization stop you, thinking, how do I take care of the 80 and give my team time back? And I'll manage those 20s in a spreadsheet when they come along, that every tool has that case they're going to struggle with.
I like the way you put that. Deal with the 80 and let the team manage the 20. So I've got a couple other pieces here. One question is, does Drivetrain integrate with spreadsheets? We do. Not only do we integrate with like a CSV upload capability of spreadsheets, but also with Google Sheets itself. That's a bit more automated since it's an online tool. You can refresh data at a cadence of, let's just say, an hour, or do a manual sync. So if you have any sort of ad hoc modeling that you need to get done, spreadsheets is a great way to do it. Another piece that I'll just touch on, given that that's come up, is I think, Paul, you were talking about the barrier to entry when it comes to, writing your script. You called it low code, no code sorts of things. Obviously, when we're dealing with Excel, if you're to look at the formula bar and kind of F2 into it, if you see a long index match and it's referencing various different tabs, all these sorts of things, you're not 100% sure what you're referencing there. It says A21 and it's bringing you all to B44. And you have to go and navigate to that, or sort of trace your formulas in order to find where that's picking up from. I think one thing that we've tried to do at Drivetrain for the people that were asking is make the code, make the formula-based planning so easy to understand that it's basically like speaking. For example, if I wanted to, calculate my gross profit, I would simply type revenue and reference that metric, and minus COGS, which is a separate metric, of course, with the autofill function there. Just because then when I'm looking at the formula, I don't need to guess where it's coming from. I can immediately see it. And so just since we're on this, I'll also remind people about the third poll question. If, hearing about this is interesting to you and you would like a demo of Drivetrain itself, you can just answer yes to that third question about having a demo. We'd be happy to set you up. I can walk you through that, or someone else from our team, I can walk you through that itself and see if it's a right use case for you.
And I'm going to add one thing. Yes, please. I have tested Drivetrain. You can see it in the Third Gen guide. And I found the natural, they're using a natural language approach. I found it fairly straightforward. I can't say I wrote really complex formulas or dug into all of it, but I will agree with you, Kirk. I thought it was straightforward. And that is one of the benefits when it has its own calculation engine, a multidimensional tool, is often you get that language of use the metric instead of A7 and C4 and D6, and you're tracing it all out. We've all been there where and they hard code at the end. So you're like, I hate you. But
that's right. Yeah, hard codes can be hard to deal with, but they're always going to be in a model eventually at some point. We need to call those out. So in terms of pricing strategies, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Paul, because when you're looking at a tool, sometimes it's seat-based, sometimes it's usage-based, sometimes it's just a flat fee, maybe subscription. Is there one way that you see as sort of preferable to others, maybe from customer adoption perspective, or just from like a value versus what you're getting perspective as well?
There's pros and cons here. I like the usage-based approach in that you could slowly scale and it's going to cost less. But some people like just having that exact locked-in amount, because we all know with usage, sometimes you get that surprise. I'd say what most tools are doing today is some combo. There's often a flat fee, and then there might be an extra fee depending on how many integrations you have, or you go beyond 10 users, or different ways to make it approximate a usage-based approach. And so I think more important than what they're doing is understanding how does that impact you and what makes sense for your business. Because some businesses, maybe if you're only going to have one user, you don't have high usage, You may very much want a usage-based, where if everybody in the company is going to use it and they're going to use it heavily, you might ideally want a subscription-based. And not saying I wouldn't pick your tool solely based on how they price, but it is a factor to think about how you're planning on using the tool and how that will impact your cost.
Beautiful. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one other piece here that I'm seeing a couple questions come up. One from Michael Agueros. He asked, how will AI be used with your product? So, I mean, the specifics here are, probably a little bit more that I can touch on, but I will say it's very similar to what Paul was mentioning before. In terms of making AI not only just a feature of Drivetrain, but embedding it in every single item within Drivetrain. Think of things like this, helping you answer questions like, where did my variance come from when I looked at budget versus actuals? And then following that sort of all the way down the rabbit hole to my original assumption that was off. Maybe it was number of sales reps I had, the quota that they were attaining, that led all the way down to my bottom line for sort of net income, or maybe even a cash value. If I can trace that and have AI help me discover these insights without me having to dig through it, that piece is going to be super valuable. Another thing is when looking at charts and looking at visuals, obviously, looking at a tabular form of your P&L is different than looking at, let's say, a waterfall version of your P&L where you have revenue and then COGS subtracted, your gross profit, so on and so forth. I think there's a third way of visualizing things, and that's through the lens of AI, where they can see things that we just simply won't see until we dig in for hours. If we can eliminate those hours worth of analyses and get the answers, within 30 seconds, within a minute, that piece there will allow us to focus our analyses on other things, or just simply catch up on the work that is inevitable within finance itself. So again, what Paul said, I think embedding it, that would probably be the best way to answer that one, Michael. So now, big question for you here, Paul. So obviously, let's say I'm a senior FP&A analyst, or maybe I'm an FP&A manager, but I want a tool because I'm getting bogged down. I want to secure buy-in from management. And, I want to win them over. I want them to enjoy it too, but they're not sure because of budget or whatever the case may be. How can I go about securing their buy-in for the tool that I want to bring in?
Does bribery count?
What's that?
I was going to say, does bribery count? No. On a serious note, that can always be a difficult conversation. I think the first thing, there's a couple things you need to be able to show beyond just, hey, it will make my life easier.
Sure.
Well, how can you quantify it will make my life easier? Let's say if you can show it's going to reduce the time you spent on non-value add activity by maybe 10 hours a month, and you can start showing, look, these value add activities I did last year brought this much to the bottom line. I was able to focus on this project. Think about if I'm able to focus on one more of those a year or two more, the value. So that's one from your perspective. But I think even the bigger thing is think how it will benefit your boss. You got to get a good tool, a strategic finance tool where they can go in and see things and they don't always have to ask you questions, or maybe they can go ask AI within the tool a question, or whatever the case may be. Think how that's going to excite them. Because if you get them excited that the tool is going to make their life easier, it's much easier to convince them next that it's also going to make your life easier, and by virtue, the business and a return. So I think you need to look at it at two things. It's don't just focus on what's in it for me. Start with what's in it for them. What's the benefit for management of bringing in the tool? What's the benefit for the business? And think about really how it benefits you kind of last.
Got it. Okay, so focus on the benefits it brings to your management, and then, you secondarily. If you can persuade them that they're going to see the value in it, then they're more likely to adopt the tool.
It's really an influencing activity of helping to see the benefit for them in the business versus, well, I want to sleep at night.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's not quite that bad. I'm being a little facetious, but we've all been there where that's how we feel sometimes when you're up at 2 in the morning trying to figure out what.
No doubt. So I got one more question here. It says, one of the constraints we have is dimensionality at a vendor expense forecasting and allocating the spend to individual SBUs. Many of the third gen tools we're doing discovery on either can't handle the flexibility and recommend to simplify. Should we simplify to meet the flexibility of the tool, or is there an 80-20 rule to follow in thinking about this? I'll give my thoughts here, Paul, and I'd be really
please.
I would say, so I'm a big Excel guy historically, right? My job, historically has been creating IPO models in Excel. I love Excel. It is a wonderful tool. And one piece of it was, learning the complexities of the modeling and then being able to model that out. But I understand that as teams get bigger, if people don't want to learn Excel that much and they want things to be a little bit simpler while still getting that level of detail, let's say at the vendor level, and that's important for their business, I think they should still be able to do that. So I would say don't compromise on the value that you bring as an FP&A analyst. I think the whole point of the FP&A team is to bring insights that will differentiate you from your competitors in your industry. So don't compromise, otherwise your competitors are going to have a competitive edge. In terms of vendor forecasting itself, that's one thing. We have a vendor forecast module that brings it down to the vendor level, occasionally even into the invoice level or the contract level within those vendors. If that's something that interests you, I would definitely recommend setting up a demo for that one, because we can show you that quite eloquently. And then on top of that, we can also change the way that the vendor forecast module is viewed. So let's just say, you log in as the head of engineering, you're going to see a different level of vendors and a different set of forecasts than, let's say, the next person that logs in from, the G&A department or the R&D department and whatnot. So definitely don't change. Find a tool that will let you model the way that you want to model. That'd be my thoughts, Paul. Do you have anything different or anything to add?
I'll add one little thought to that. I agree with what you said. I think he's right. There are many third-gen tools, especially those that have focused on the small market, that struggle with dimensionality. So if that's critical, you need to find those tools, because there are some that are really good with that, strong. You mentioned Drivetrain, and there are others that are solid in their dimensionality. The second thing I would just always ask is, and I'm not taking vendor as this example, but
Sure.
Always ask yourself, is this a level of detail that's necessary, or am I overcomplicating really a key driver?
Sure.
If it's not, then ask yourself, okay, without this as the tool, can it handle everything that really is a key driver? Do I feel like they're going to scale with me? So I'm not saying don't give up. Make sure you have all those key things, but just keep in mind that 80-20. Sometimes the level of complexity we want isn't adding any accuracy, isn't adding value. And so just make sure it's a value add that you're asking for.
Sure. Yeah, no, I've definitely struggled with this one, Paul, because, like you mentioned in Excel, you can do any sort of modeling you want. The question is, how much time do you want to spend on it? And when we're looking at vendor expenses or headcount modeling, those sorts of things can get quite cumbersome, and the risk of manual error skyrockets. I think my goal, especially with Drivetrain, is we want to create something where you can get that level of detail, but the risk of manual error isn't there. The manual effort required to make those views happen also isn't there. So it's a bit more automated, less prone to error, but you still get the level of detail you want. I agree, especially in Excel. If you're going that deep in Excel, the question is, do we need to make this a bit more back of the napkin? Because, you can do a back of the napkin calc and get 80% of your forecast correct. The last 20% is where 80% of the time is going to occur, right? That's where your model build really is.
Yeah, and I agree with you. The tool should be able to manage that. I just make sure you're asking for things that add value. Think through it, and do you need it?
Sure. So, Paul, we've hit a lot of questions today on FP&A, not only choosing a tool, the tools themselves, functions and capabilities you should look out for. Is there anything as we wrap up here that we've missed that you think is an important call out for anybody who's evaluating a tool to know, to think about, or just other thoughts and comments you've seen in the industry so that you think would be interesting for the audience to hear about?
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say is do your homework, know the problem you're trying to solve, and make sure you get your questions, your list ahead of time. We'll be sending a checklist to people who registered so that you're prepared. Don't get sold on something you don't need that the salesman say, but we can do this or we can do that. Make sure you get that tool that really is going to allow you to be more efficient. And then I'll just leave with this thought. As much as all of us are like, yes, I need a tool, I'm drowning. Remember, it starts with people and processes. If you don't have the right people and you don't have the right processes, don't spend a bunch of money on the platform because it's not going to solve your problem. Okay. The tool is an enabler. It should enable you to be more efficient and effective. And when you have the first two and you add the right tool, the right platform, that's when magic happens. So make sure you think of it holistically and realize it's going to be a challenge. Change management is real. even if you pick the right tool, and I use that term loosely, you still have to manage the change. Implementation can still fail, even if you pick the perfect tool for your company, if you're not careful.
That's great to wrap up with, Paul. Again, thanks so much for jumping on with us. We really valued it. We're going to put some links for anybody that would be interested to a couple of things we referenced here today. Again, if you'd like a demo of the tool itself, or just or would like any of the insights that Paul's talked about today, we'll put the links in there as well. So please sign up for that. You're welcome to be added to our email list as well, and we will be able to send you a lot more items in that case as well. Paul, thanks so much for joining us. Everybody, thanks for coming along for the ride. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kirk. Real pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much, Paul. Bye, everyone.